give us another 30 seconds at 1:02. Okay, perfect. So we are going to be, we are recording this session. So welcome everybody. My name is Yesenia Curiel and I'm the Staff Assembly President. Pronouns are she, her, and ella. And I'm super excited to have this leadership chat today. We're going to go ahead and have, actually, Alvin is going to be, as our Vice President, he's going to be leading or facilitating the leadership chat with Andy Boyd. And we will go ahead and if we have time, we will go ahead and allow for live questions. We do have several questions that were pre-submitted prior to this. So we'll go ahead and focus on those questions. And then if we have time, we will go ahead and open for live questions. And we're still letting people into the room. So bear with us. Let's give, let me see. Do we have any more people in the waiting room? Perfect. So we'll go ahead and start. And then just so you all know, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat regarding not necessarily the leadership chat, but if there's something else that's going on, you can go ahead and send a private message to myself or to Austin, Ashley, Lorena, and Vanessa, and Ian that are on Staff Assembly that are here. So welcome, Andy and Alvin. I'll go ahead and pass it on to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Yesenia. So as Yesenia mentioned, my name is Alvin Chaw, and really I do want to give an opportunity for Andy to introduce himself to us.
Thanks. It's like the hardest thing for me to do, Alvin. Andy Boyd. My day job is Executive Director of the Center of Institutional Effectiveness. Since July, I've been in the role of the Chief Resilience Officer, helping to lead us through this fun pandemic. And you'll find it fun is not really a fun word, but I like to use it to cover up the craziness that it all is.
And really quick, I did wanted to give you some time as well, Andy, if you had any updates that you wanted to kind of just share with everyone that's here in regards to what's, the current trend, the current situation that's going across the country, here locally within our own campus, what's going on. So if you wanted to just provide any updates that you might have and share with the group.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, coming from an academic institution, it's funny, the scientists were right, or at least it seems like that their projections were correct. If you look at, how the 1918 the flu rolled out in 1918, the winter months had a huge spike after the initial wave. And I think you've probably heard about it as a second wave. We're seeing obviously states in the Midwest and the Northeast where it's already cold and residents are inside. They're seeing pretty substantive spikes. I think Illinois has seen some really high numbers, and Minnesota has also been up there. And so, that was an indicator. And, here we are in California the last 2 weeks across the state. We've really seen the numbers start to rise dramatically. So from that, the governor is the tiering structure that is there is really meant to try to calibrate and mitigate some of the risks of exposure. And so Merced County went down to tier 1 yesterday officially. Today is the official date. Yesterday was a notice it was going to happen, and it was pretty much a foregone conclusion, which is why the notice came out yesterday. So with that, basically Merced County will have to have 3 weeks of being in the red tier before it can move back to the red tier, tier 2. And it's unlikely that'll happen in the near future with the case rates being upwards of 80 a day that I've been seeing. The statistics that we need to be striving for are about 20 a day. So we're now, looking at a factor of 3 to 4 times what those rates need to be. Hopefully I think it was like almost austerity measures will actually help, snuff this out. And I think the challenging part becomes how we interact over the holiday season, both with Thanksgiving and then with Christmas. So it's not necessarily good news, and it's actually one where I do recommend that everybody tries to take some caution and really give some thought to their behaviors and how they interact with those. And I say it that way because I'm not so much of a avoid everything, because life still has to go on, but it really is to do it with some conscious thought. Try to be outdoors as much as you can, have distance, those kind of really smart ways of interacting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I wanted to, I have an initial question that I think would be helpful for everyone who's attending, as well as anybody who watches the recording later, but not many of us really know what a Chief Resilience Officer is. Can you kind of share with everyone your role and responsibility to the campus, as well as the campus community, and or who you oversee, and what you oversee here as the Chief Resilience Officer?
So Chief Resilience Officer roles typically exist at a city level. I think there's 100 of them that I've seen across the country, and it's again, like, think of a city like New Orleans, where they have hurricanes and then they have massive floods and they have to plan and react for it. Depending on what each municipality and region has from its basic risk standpoint, that's kind of the resilience officer role in general, is to try to kind of prepare for it. In California, we obviously have earthquakes that we do I'd say a pretty good job of prepping for and thinking about. And I think fire is another big one that we're having to live with far more often than I think any of us want to. And there's actually the UC system is going to be rolling out a climate resilience plan program in the spring, and it's really more about reacting to climate change, sea level rise and the like. But still, like, if you think of resilience, it's really about that adaptability to change that's being forced on you in a lot of ways. And so, from the pandemic perspective, it's kind of like, if you think about business continuity or risk, you have all these different situations that you need to be resilient to if they come up. It's a new role, so it's not like it's a big team or it's a big ongoing program. What I'd say is that I've been tapping into a lot of our existing departments to partner with the talent and the team members that are there. The one area that there's been kind of direct oversight on is the COVID Response Center, and I've been leading that with Dee Aker and really building that from scratch. It's the kind of thing where it's kind of a blended resource across the different functional lines that we have, whether you think of it from HR and academic personnel and then students. There's not really like a one function that covers all that. So this has been kind of another layer that we put on to help mitigate that across the three different kind of personnel types or population types we have on campus, to make sure that we're implementing our mitigation measures consistently and providing the resources to each of those population bases.
Thank you. So continuing on with kind of that topic, what has been the most difficult challenge in dealing with this pandemic? So excluding the pandemic itself, obviously, is already a challenge in its own. But what other challenges have you had to deal with that have been kind of challenging in regards to kind of dealing with the whole pandemic and our institution and ensuring the safety of our campus community?
I think the hardest thing it's not as tangible as we would like it to be. And what I mean by that is, you can see a hurricane on the horizon and you can batten down the hatches, right? With the pandemic, you really have lagging indicators. So right now we're seeing people who are sick from interactions that they had 7 days ago. And so at that point in time, you have silent spread happening, and it's kind of one of those snowball effects that you're late to the game on. So the challenge is kind of twofold. One is that we have bad information just because of the nature of what it is, and then the second then is it's really just fundamentally the fear that comes with this, because we can't see it, we can't work with it, and fear locks down our best thinking. And so if you look across the state, the country, each state's approached it differently, and I'd say California has been pretty reserved, and really focused on health and welfare, and honestly, rightfully so. But there's also the other end of that spectrum, and how we allow ourselves to kind of toggle that is becoming a little bit of a challenge as we think about things, because I don't see it as being one day a switch will flip and everything will be better. It's going to be gradual. It's going to change, slowly over time. And so finding that kind of comfort as we learn to grapple with living through a pandemic is something that is, to me, the biggest issue to deal with.
Yeah, that, and I assume that because we don't know if COVID is going to continue to be something like the flu, where it's a seasonal thing that we have to kind of plan for, or if whatever vaccine we come up with is truly going to prevent it from ever expanding anymore. So
right.
So yeah, that I see the challenges that kind of exist, and you're absolutely right in regards to kind of the analogy you made, or the reference that regards to a hurricane, right? Because with a hurricane, we can see it coming and we can, buckle down and we know how to prepare for it. Whereas this thing is completely invisible and we don't know if somebody's, asymptomatic and carrying it or sharing it until they start, developing signs. So, so thank you for that. My next question, and we're going to do a slight shift. So from your perspective, what has worked and what has not worked since the start of this pandemic and the transition to remote work?
I think, I'll start with what hasn't worked, and it really isn't a hasn't. It's more of a, I think most of us at Merced know that we're building from the ground up, and we often use the analogy of building the plane as we fly it. And so, other universities might have, big bench depths with business continuity plans, and then, even a team that, jumps on this. And a lot of this was kind of from scratch. It's been interesting because it puts us a little bit behind the 8 ball in some regards to being able to stay a few steps ahead. But at the same token, it's what I'm also kind of most proud of is that we have responded. And I think we've done so very well. And I think that we're getting to that point where it's difficult to say to be on par with our sister campuses that have medical schools, but we'll definitely be in the running for at least, keeping up with them as best we can. And I think that that's something that all of you on the call, in different ways are helping to make happen. And, it's just the kind of thing where you can prepare for these things. You can do the thinking in advance. But we've got so many other things we're thinking about, like just existing, like building 2020, right? That took a ton of energy. Like now here we are just about to turn on our last round of buildings and we're going to drop a pandemic on you. And it's like, yeah, no, come on. Like just, there's all you can do is laugh and be like, all right, roll up the sleeves and let's get through this next challenge. And I think the team effort across UC Merced has been phenomenal. I think being in the UC system has also been phenomenal. I give kudos to all our colleagues at our sister campuses. I had come from the CSU before this, and I actually found a lot more partnering at the CSU than I did at the UC up until this point in time. And because it was always kind of like, oh yeah, we'll totally help you. And now they wouldn't. Right. Whereas now they're like, no, what do you need? And I'm like, woohoo, finally. So it's been, I'm on weekly calls with vice chancellors at all of our sister campuses, and literally it has been a great thing that I just seen a system gel like it is. So,
right. You mentioned kind of 2020, but as we get closer to the end of 2020, what strategies are in the work for spring 2021 and later?
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties in the beginning was that there was kind of shifting landscape or sands from even the governor's office on what the regulations were. We didn't get the IHE guidelines, I think, until like July 5th or 7th, and we start a month later, right? And that's not enough time to plan. If we allow that to be a framework that which we're going to have to play by, that lets us start planning for these events, in the spring. And so if we think of we're on the curve right now, there's also the downside of it. And so that's likely, in the spring, March, April, to basically start shifting to a more healthy state. And I know that that's a long time. I would love it to be, I always want to be wrong, where it's like, no, it's better next month. Fantastic. When that point happens, what are we going to do at tier 2? What operations are we going to bring back? Same thing with tier 3, what operations are we going to bring back? That's where a lot of the focus is right now, to make sure we understand how we would take advantage of those opportunities as quickly as possible, recognizing that we can't bring all the students back at once, right? If the students aren't here in January, they're not necessarily going to be here in March. So I think it's really one of those where this spring is a little bit unique in that, we may have some opportunity and do a little bit more once things ramp down. And then it's really going to be kind of right now it's a little bit of a forecasting challenge, just with when you have the positive news from the vaccines that are out there. Right. And if those are actually out distributed as they are and they're as effective as they're saying they are, then next fall changes dramatically depending on the supply chain of getting that out and how we react to it as a population base. So I can't really see, honestly, much past this spring. And I really look at it as how can we, knowing that we're going to have to be living with this situation at least through this next semester, what's our best way of doing it in a way that's both safe and taking advantage of the opportunities when when our numbers come back down, and they will once we get to a point in time.
Yeah. Just thinking about vaccine, I know with the mandate in regards to the flu vaccine, do you think we will also, once a vaccine for COVID, for this, virus, it has been, okayed and released by science, it's been approved by the FDA. Do we foresee, or do you foresee it also being a mandate for us to take this vaccine to come back to work?
I'm not sure, honestly. I think that there will be some reflection on the flu vaccine and whether that was the best solution as a system level. And so it's one of those things where I can't really, forecast on that. I haven't been in any discussions one way or the other on it, but I think that it's interesting with just in general the United States and allowing choice to be part of the equation. And so I don't know, Alvin, and that's one that we can have a drink over and see what happens.
Yeah, no, I was just curious because thinking about, with the flu as well, that once the vaccine comes out for this, whether or not it be mandated. But again, you're absolutely right. We don't really know. And again, we can certainly sit and have a drink or two and really discuss it. But again, we don't.
Outside distance, not inside, but it's just joking.
Yeah. So moving on to kind of my next question for you. We're now working remote, but there's a lot of talk about a hybrid work schedule if and when we can return to campus. With that understanding that it may be dependent on the department that each and every single one of us belongs to, can you kind of share what a hybrid schedule might be in regards to to staff returning back to campus?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hybrid schedules, I look at it less from the department and more of the space. And the reason why I say that is that a lot of the constraints are around how we use the space and how the space is articulated, how it's built. And so if workstations are such that people are within 6 feet of each other, then we're going to have to make physical distancing type of accommodations where one person is in one seat and the other person's not there. And it might be that we're on like the diagonals of workstations. And if you look at like the downtown center as an example, you won't be having your next door neighbor work next to you until we're far, I think, down the line with having seen this kind of overcome the pandemic. Honestly, we'd be looking at a lot of the restrictions be removed. To put up partitions in between everybody, there's some utility to that depending on the workstation, but I say only some, because when you apply it to everywhere, it doesn't pencil out, especially if it's a short-term 3 to 6 month time horizon. And so I think that it's really going to depend on how the office is built out and how each department kind of operates and their needs for it. And I think that recognizing that we're remote right now, there is at least some flexibility with us being able to have those types of shifts where we allow people to be there. And it'll be interesting because I know we were looking into tier 3, which is orange, and looking at how can we allow kind of some group gatherings and some of those kind of things, because I see that as being one of the, while we're all in Zoom and we can kind of communicate, there is something about being in a room and seeing the same thing at the same time. And that was something that leadership was asking us to kind of plan for in greater increments. So I see that being probably what I'd see in tier 3 to start with, and then looking at how we allow the shifts and in the schedules to make sense.
Right. So taking into consideration kind of, and in no way am I just mentioning, I'm just going to mention what I know of. So in regards to taking a look at the setup at the Students First Center, where it's kind of an open forum where the student and the staff engages. Once we do return to campus, once there is a slight return, whether it be hybrid, whether it's partial staff, would you consider, or would you recommend that maybe they consider kind of that clear barrier in front of themselves between the student and the staff? Because again, the setup itself is not 6 feet apart, right? It's a counter in front of them, and even in the transition of a new building, the current setup is slightly modified. To my knowledge, again, I don't know if there are works that's being done, discussions that's happening in regards to modifying certain setups with the Students First Center, but just my thought process in regards to how the old Students First Center in the first floor of the library is set up, would you kind of recommend that that setup be put in place?
I mean, I think the guidance right now is that if you have, I'll call it that counter interaction, right, then you do have that physical barrier. I mean, when we go to Costco right now, right, when they
Yeah.
check your receipt walking out the
Right.
door, they have it at every grocery store. So I think it's one of those, assuming that the operation is running, right, and that we're meeting in that kind of modality, then, we would need to look at establishing some sort of divide. And I see a lot of these as being temporary, where you use like what's in the library now, and I think that is far more permanent than, something that is just a plexiglass partition.
Yeah.
So and I think that's a great example of some of those accommodations that I would expect us to make, with there being that kind of physical interaction. But again, less so across every office and every space to make that divide happen, because that just becomes unwieldy from a project perspective and costs and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, and which kind of leads me into my next question for you, which is the physical changes of the campus. So what can we expect in regards to changes physically to the campus buildings, whether it's going to be reduced class sizes, so we're removing seats out of the classrooms themselves so that we're not having folks come in and sit down and, really have oversized classes, or are we, again, with the barriers, putting barriers between in front of folks. So how will things change physically on campus because of this?
So at least, again, assuming that there's a time horizon where the pandemic kind of runs itself to close, where the vaccine lets us get back to whatever the new normal is past that, right? I don't see there being a need to, so when you talk about removing chairs, like that's a great example of, it's a good idea on paper, and then you say, where do I store the chairs?
Right.
We don't have a massive warehouse to store all the furniture that we want to remove from these things. So it really becomes how we use the space and how we create the occupancy limits, because again, we don't have a place to store all this furniture. So the IHE guidelines, the Institutional of Higher Ed guidelines from the state, spell out pretty clearly, kind of what's allowed. And then they also, at the tiers, they talk about it at lecture halls, I think in orange, are allowed to be at 50% of capacity or no more than 200, whichever is less. And whereas in yellow, it goes to being 50% of the lecture hall. So that right there puts a big limit on each classroom at 50% is basically our high value that we plan for classrooms. And so there is some analysis that we've done in the past, and we'll be pulling it back up on, looking at the CRN, the class level, and seeing how that works. So it's less about modifying the space, in my opinion, because of the time horizon. Again, if this was a 5-year or 10-year problem, we'd be talking about this differently.
Yeah.
But if it's a 1 year or 18-month or 2-year problem, then I don't think we'll be looking to make that capital investment to retrofit everything, other than where we need to be able to, like we talked about with the partitions and that such. So then it's more signage and how students sit and how they're asked to, basically sit in a classroom, and occupancy limits that we have and the like.
And again, I'm going to shift topics slightly to kind of training. So what trainings currently exist or are being offered to staff to support and cover working remote and or on campus? So for those staff that are actually returning to campus and working, what trainings are they getting? What trainings are available in regards to staff who are working from home or working at, a different area off campus, off site?
So I'll have to actually defer the majority of this to HR, because it's their world on talent development. What I'll say, and it's a plug out for Jessica Duffy and the CIE, is that she's got a great little deck on remote working from a teaming perspective. And it's something that I know she'll gladly share. It's in MS Sway, which we can share to behind our firewall. And it really talks about how you work as a team virtually, because there are some teaming agreements that you basically know, what tools we're using, how to reach out to me, that kind of thing. And I think it's really important to think about as a group, because it really is, do I make a phone call? Do I reach out to on MS Teams? Or is it some other, email the only way to communicate? And so there's that. And then, I think we have lynda.com switched over to LinkedIn, right? And so, that's a great resource that I honestly think, I myself still take classes in it all the time to learn different components. So I would look to that on any of the, I'll call it technical development areas that you're looking to grow into. And go from that to then talking to your manager about what some of your aspirations are. I always like to have that conversation as part of my own evaluation with staff around what their aspirations are, because basically I like to think of it as an employee, I have to take it upon myself to say how I want to grow my capabilities, and that I then look to partner with my boss on how I make that happen. So having your own plan or your own roadmap is, I think, step one in a lot of ways, and then working with HR, working with your manager is the next steps on getting there.
I think that's a perfect answer. And you covered, I think you answered it perfectly. I'm gonna, again, switch over to strategies, kind of the topic being more related to strategies. So you mentioned it earlier as well, partnering up with other leadership across the sister campuses. So what are the other institutions doing well that we might be able to also mirror here and utilize it and implement?
Yeah, I mean, I think the area that the other campuses have a leg up on us on is, again, with the health centers. They have a level of operational integration around both the public health response and then the data management that comes with it and the like. And so that really allows them to kind of rocket forward when they apply their resources to it. We've been, again, UCLA, UC Davis, UC San Diego, they've all opened up their playbook with each of us and, basically said, this is how we're approaching this. And I'd say in general, I think the UC's done a great job of designing responses to it and being really thoughtful about some of the risks that are out there. If we switch to the other side of the country, I can give a shout out to my alma mater, Northeastern. They've done, about 200,000 tests in the fall semester. And they basically were similar to UC San Diego saying, we want to have a certain level of in-person, so we're going to really ramp things up. There's a cost associated with that, and it becomes an interesting optimization problem. But in general, the campuses that had public health components, UC Berkeley, UCLA, they already had a ton of expertise, and I can give a shout out to our team. Nancy Burke was super helpful. Thelma was super helpful. I mean, there was, I think, a team of about 25 faculty members that really were helping us in the summer pull a lot of this together. But we were starting from a different playing field in these older, more mature campuses. And so, long story short is to say that, really, it's not any one thing. It's a system of things that need to be kind of integrated to then respond to all these different risks in a calibrated way. Things like, how do you make it so that the symptom monitoring app isn't just a symptom monitoring app? It's also making sure that you had your required testing. It's also make sure you have your required training, and then also, you have your flu vaccine so that then you have one badge instead of, 3 or 4 different compliance checks. Those are some of the things that they're doing that we'd like to get to with, looking at making it easier to operate with all these new requirements on us.
Right. And I'm going to shift to kind of the biggest topic now. And these are questions that recently just came in as well. So the first one being, and the topic, what was that?
I said, you're scaring me. We're already talking about a pandemic.
We're not changing any topic outside of the pandemic. So it really is related to the pandemic. It's more related to COVID itself and kind of what how we've been reacting to COVID. And so the first one that I have for you is the COVID testing wait time at Castle, which has been extremely long. And this individual mentioned that it took them about 2.5 hours the last time they were there. Are there alternatives for testing available? And then to follow up with that question, is there something being done to bring testing to campus so that staff can test on campus? I believe students are being tested on campus, and so will that become an alternative for staff to come to campus and utilize testing here versus going to Castle and waiting an extremely long time?
So we have on I'll try to answer all of them, but make sure if I miss anything, bring it back up. We have on the do your part side around testing, and there's really 2 primary options. One is go use Castle, and the other is to honestly find your own testing site that you choose. The county's testing site, like, I'm agnostic to a testing site. It just needs to show that you've been taking the test, and basically your results are that you're clear. So we have a method where basically you could go to the county and basically you would fax to Castle the results so that they're our Occ Health provider that's basically handling the medical record. again, we're more concerned that you've taken your appointment, and that, you know, the way that it works from a legal perspective is that employers have the right to know with COVID. So it's one of those where we're really just making sure you have the appointment, and if you're positive, we'll find out because, you know, we're expected to. So really the Castle is an urgent care clinic. And I think one thing that I want to, you know, I say this because I remind myself, I get a lot of the emails, and I do empathize with our staff and what they're being asked to deal with. I also want to keep it in perspective in that Merced, unfortunately, this is where our healthcare desert environment is. That we would be in a real world of hurt without a Castle. And so I'm very much thankful that they're there, and they've partnered with us, and they've come to campus a couple of times. And, you know, I've talked with them about it, and, you know, they're in urgent care first. And so if they have a bad day in their urgent care facility, their wait times spike, and they've tried to increase their provider counts and the like. So I don't want to pile onto them, because I really do applaud their efforts to be able to respond here in the, you know, Merced area to COVID. Going forward, and, you know, looking at how we can help with this is, I actually just went to UC Davis yesterday. And UC Davis is offering to basically support us with some saliva testing, which is the next round in PCR testing that is a lot less invasive and pretty straightforward from logistics to manage the actual testing components of it. We have to work with Office of the President and a few other situations around employees and how we would test on campus. But I do see there being called a light at the end of that tunnel, where we should be able to offer, you know, testing in the spring on campus. And I don't want to overcommit, so you know, it's one of those things where I don't have a solid yes on, but I can tell you that all my energy is in making that happen. Right. And that it would be done in the same, you know, process that students have at UC Davis. It's one line, right? And then they basically have a student area and they have an employee area once you come in, but it's the same process. So we'd want to emulate something similar to that here. And I look at the spring as being realistic. Will take us a little bit of shifting over our testing. Student Health Center is basically like a medical center for the students, right? So you know, Dr. Brinkoff is like their physician. And so they have their resources built in on the student side that, you know, we as employees don't have, which would be like an occupational health or a clinic that we would be participatory in. Mm-hmm. So we'll get to that point, and you know, my goal is sooner than the better. And I can say that I ran the test at UC Davis yesterday to spit into the tube, and I was hearing horror stories about running out of saliva, and I can say that it wasn't that bad. It was actually they give you a little shot of water to swish around, and then it was just a few seconds and off you go. So
it wasn't like the DNA testing where you would constantly spit in as much as you can into that little vial. And
I think it took me 3 times, I think, is what it got me to. So I heard horror stories of like 10 minutes of trying to spit, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how much is that? So, but yeah, that to me is a game changer when we get to that, because we're talking to UC Davis, and I'm on a system-wide task force as well around increasing the frequency of our testing. So that we have that, you know, part of what comes with the screening is you get that confidence from a data perspective that you don't have active prevalence, you know, spread. And so there's a lot to be said for spending the energy there and making this happen. And again, we'll still be looking to use Castle for symptomatic situations and other things that we'll need. It's just a matter of, can we get to a more expedited process? And I know there's a few other technologies that are coming out around rapid tests that allow for deduction of if it was a flu, rhinovirus, or COVID, which is really helpful when it comes to the quarantine perspective, where, you know, you might be sick with a cold, but it's a symptom that's COVID right now, and I can't deduce that. So we asked you to take the time off and assume positive, versus you know, being able to say, no, you just have the cold, and once you clear your cold, come on back.
So you mentioned it briefly in kind of your answer, but I wanted to kind of just follow up on it, because we did have a secondary question in regards to location. So if we went to, let's just say, you know, the fairgrounds for the free testing that's given by Merced County,
yep.
And we got our results, you mentioned faxing it to Castle, or are we faxing it, or are we providing this negative results or the result itself to UC Merced?
So there was and I saw that on the questions you kind of sent over in advance, and I just want to clarify that if you're part of the lot quality program, then we're looking to basically have confirmation that you had a scheduled appointment at a CLIA testing facility. So when you submit to CASEL, you're basically submitting your medical record to them, and then they're just keeping the record and they're giving us a check mark saying that you've completed the requirement. If you're not part of the lot quality program, you still can go get tested at the county, and that's the state's funding that. So if you as an individual want to be tested, the county is definitely where I recommend going for that. They don't share the results with us directly. So I know that was a question of, do we get access to it? And it's only through our employer program that we're having basically that appointment information. So
Okay.
if you're positive, just to be clear, if you're positive, the county though then lets the employer know, because that's basically one of the ways of mitigating the risks and the exposure that we have. So it's not that we wouldn't hear at all. It's one of those things where if you're positive, they try to take you out of the active population so you're not spreading it to others. And so that's why the county public health would reach out to us and let us know that so-and-so tested positive.
So if you're selected as kind of that pool, the secondary pool, or to ask to take the COVID testing because you're working on campus, or you go to campus to work, the recommendation is to do it at CASEL, because that's the official facility that we have an agreement with in regards to doing COVID testing. But if you're just interested in doing a COVID test, the recommendation would be up to the individual's personal choice.
Honestly, it's truly up to the individual's personal choice. We just need to have it satisfied. So okay. CASEL is the one where I can, we have the program built in, but I honestly, like, if you would rather go to, the county, go to the county. If you want to go to, CVS,
yeah.
It's up to you. And it's one of those things where we just need to, know that you had your appointment.
Okay. And I may follow up with you on that, because I think with the wait time, I know some staff have expressed the wait time being very, extreme, that, they can go to CVS and it'll take, a whole lot less, because they're in and outs. And so
the challenge is the financials at other locations.
Yeah.
So the county is basically free, and the way that we have it set up is, basically they start with billing insurance, and then because you're effectively an essential employee, if you're here, a designated employee, you're working, and there's the way that the bill was passed, it allows for a certain amount of testing around that. I don't want to say like fully yes, go wherever you want, because then you're going to look to be reimbursed on that, and that's where we're going to make sure that the mechanisms are aligned. But
yeah,
in general, I know that there have been individuals in Mariposa, for instance, that have wanted to get tested up there, and I'm like, absolutely, we just need you to fax the result to CASEL. So
okay.
So I would recommend from the financial side, I'd say the county is probably the simplest to deal with, and as a secondary to CASEL.
Yeah, I think what would be helpful is to get that information from CASEL, or that information to send to CASEL out, so that if individuals, again, it's up to them. The recommendation, the campus recommendation is obviously CASEL, but I think to have that information so that individuals can choose to go to, whoever they prefer, again, to send it in, so that they know they can send it in. But again, I can reach out to you on that topic.
I think what I'll end up doing, just because I'm not sure about the expenses elsewhere, is that I'll recommend backup as the county, with CASEL being covered, because if we're ultimately covering any additional costs that may come through, then I need to make sure that's handled appropriately. Yeah. But again, if people are, because I know some individuals, again, I'll use Mariposa, that are getting tested frequently in Mariposa for personal reasons, that satisfies our requirement. So.
Yeah, and I think we have time for one last question, and the last question that I have for you, let me make sure I'm asking a good one while I have you here. What is, so we get the daily health check email, every day, every morning. What's it being used for, and do we always need to, check in, or say, verify ourselves on a daily basis if we know we're not going to campus? And I think there's even a message in there that says, if you're not going to campus for the next 14 days, click here. But we're constantly getting that email. So what's going on with that results, or what what happens when we submit that and what's being stored. I know, I'm assuming that the importance of it is really for those who say yes, right, they're experiencing symptoms of COVID. But in regards to many of us who are saying no, or that they're not working on campus, what can we do about it? Why are we constantly getting it? What is the data being used for?
Sure. So the use of the data, we'll start with that, and you nailed it, which is that we're obviously those individuals that are symptomatic that would normally be coming to campus, we need them to be paying attention to their symptoms and not come to campus when they are symptomatic. You know, it's really one of the most important mitigation measures you have. And I would honestly say this about yourself: if you're sick over the holidays, don't go to your family gathering. If you feel any rundown, just stay home. Like this is the year to just be like, I'm going to tap out. And so that to me is the primary role of it. We are checking for compliance against the CAT card access. And so those individuals that are coming to campus, we are checking to make sure that they're following up with their symptom monitoring. You know, and if they're not, we reach out to the supervisor and others to just, you know, nudge. We're really trying hard not to be punitive out of the gate. It's more of a, hey, we're noticing you're not, you know, following up on it. Let's make sure we get, you know, back on the appropriate track. I understand that for those that aren't coming to campus, it's a kind of a nuisance, and you know, we discussed it early on, but because we had so many areas that we had to kind of cover ground on, this was satisfactory for what we needed to do, knowing that there's means to improve it down the road. And part of what I had mentioned earlier about like a badge where you have basically multiple compliance checks integrating is something that we would aspire to get to. And so for those that aren't coming in and have basically, you know, there's not any intention to, there's not harm from the standpoint, like we're not sending a list out for all those that haven't checked the box. You know, I'm always hesitant to say don't pay attention to it, because I actually think it's a healthy habit every morning to just check that, you know, do you have your symptoms or not? And again, we're just a yes, no on the symptoms. Some of the campuses are actually getting down to individual symptoms. We're not at that level of depth behind it. So it really is, you know, I guess I can say it this way. I apologize to all of you from the nuisance perspective. We get it. I understand. I would love to have been able to make something more sophisticated. But honestly, with everything we had to cover in the summer and the fall, this was a good middle ground for us. And hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit more nuance in the future with different options on that.
Yeah, great. At this time, I do wanted to pass it back to Yesenia. She mentioned she had some questions that she wanted to ask you, Andy. But I wanted to thank you at least for answering the questions that I asked you. And so thank you very much. I'll pass it back to Yesenia.
Perfect. Thank you. Oh, hold on. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So I did receive some questions, some live questions. The first one is, what if someone is coming off leave but has now tested positive for COVID-19? What do they need to return to work?
So on our website, it's pretty straightforward on COVID positive and also quarantine. Pretty much all of it's a time-based algorithm at this point, in that if you're COVID positive, you're asymptomatic, meaning you're not exhibiting symptoms, it's 10 days minimum. If you are exhibiting symptoms, then it's 3 days after your last symptom, and that's a Merced County requirement. CDC is at 24 hours, Merced County 72 from your last symptoms. The symptoms can be tricky with COVID. There are individuals that have some long-term impacts to breathing, for instance. And so that's where we then require a medical note to kind of return back in a way that would allow to say that not at risk from spread, but are still exhibiting some of these symptoms. So we try to have the website, the Do Your Part, be pretty clear on what the requirements are on that. And that's basically how we've been approaching it.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question I have, what are the strategies you're using to weigh the needs of different campus constituencies, such as students, faculty, and staff, when resources are scarce?
That's a broad one. It really depends, because it's you know, the hard part with any enterprise is it takes money to basically bring the mission forward, right? So like we have to balance, and I don't want to make it about money in, money out, but their resources are part of the equation. And so it might not always be clear why we're spending money in one area to support another. And it's just one of those things where it's really situationally dependent. So I can't give too specific of one, other than to say that I can say that as a leadership group, there's definitely lots of discussion around both equity around it, making sure that it's in the spirit and values of UC Merced, and you know, that we're trying to make the best choices for the institution over the long term.
Thank you. The other question I have is, if a staff member is working remote and needs to do a one-time visit to campus, do we need to have a flu shot?
I believe the flu mandate, it does require that if you're physically on campus, then yes, you would need to have the test that you've completed the flu shot.
Perfect. Well, these are all the questions that I have for you. And so at this point, I just want to go ahead and give us a little bit of time, because I know that we have a couple of announcements that we need to make. But any last comments that you have for us, Andy? And again, we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and talk to us today.
Yeah, I can say just there's a group of us that meet basically twice a week, and we definitely appreciate feedback from all of our campus constituents. And if there's any area that you would like to see improvement on, you know, ideas for consideration, it usually sparks great conversation. So we definitely do look forward to hearing, you know, these kind of conversations. We'll see if there's things we can improve upon. But I do basically want to keep submitting and asking the questions that you're doing, because it really does spur good discussion and hopefully good outcomes for the campus long term.
Do you have, what's the best way for people to give you the feedback?
Well, I think that's a great one. What's the best way to give me? It's great when it's like batched, you know, because when you get it on a daily, like, you know, it's hard. But I would honestly, it's something that maybe I could talk to you and Alvin about, where even through staff assembly, if we were to get them in kind of a reoccurring, you know, type of situation, I think that'd be really helpful. I know that we tried to do that with the website, with even some of the Q&As, but it's one of those things where it would be, I think, great to partner on something like this.
Perfect. Well, we do have a staff assembly meeting happening this week, and I know that it was put into the chat recently. So I think that's something where we can start off in that realm. Well, we'll gather information maybe at our general meetings, and then we can go ahead and provide you those questions, and then hopefully you can provide us some answers for our following meeting.
Yep.
It's
And then
just
I think
to start us off.
And the other thing too is with some of the town halls, I think leadership's looking at, you know, being able to, we want to share it widely, you know, the type of information, so that we're making sure that if somebody missed this meeting, that they didn't miss all the information, right? So I would definitely appreciate that approach.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Ashley, who's going to give us an announcement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone. So my name is Ashley Somerset, and I'm one of the co-chairs for our events. And so I'm just gonna share my screen real quick. Right now we do have a contest going on called Falling in Love with Your Workspace. And it's basically, we wanna see how you guys decorated your workspace, whether for the fall or just if you've decorated your workspace at all to kind of help provide a little comfort and cheer while we're at home. But if you are also working on campus, that includes decorating wherever your workspace is on campus. So if it's your office desk, or if you primarily work out of a vehicle, if you've decorated your work vehicle in some way. So in the staff assembly newsletter that came out today, there is a link where you can submit your picture, and then we will have a vote link go out where everyone will get to vote, and our top 3 winners will get a $75 gift card. So we just wanted to make you guys aware of that. We did extend the deadline, so you do have until November 30th to participate. So if you haven't decorated yet but still want to, go ahead and join on in. We just finished up our contest in October, and those winners were announced in our newsletter today. We will have a contest in December too. That's going to be a door decorating contest. So get your ideas flowing for that. But these are just ways that we are kind of celebrating how we've adjusted and made our workspaces comfortable. So wanted to put that out there for you. If you guys have any questions at all regarding submissions or anything, you can always reach out to me and I will help you out.
Perfect. Well, just again, as a reminder, I know that somebody, Vanessa did put in the chat, our next general meeting is happening this Thursday, November 19th, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. The Zoom link is included. And if you all have any suggestions for other people that we can bring to our leadership chats, please let us know. Send us an email or send us any questions that you might have. Our general email is there. And again, thank you everybody for your time. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to connect with us and looking forward to seeing you all on Thursday. Thank you. Bye-bye.